Not everyone who survives a war was ever on a battlefield. Some were inside carefully engineered realities designed to erase them. Here's the uncomfortable fact most people never hear. Modern psychological operations don't fail because they're weak. They fail because some minds refuse to fully sync with them. In controlled studies and classified debriefs, highly trained operatives have collapsed not from torture, not from starvation, but from prolonged cognitive dissonance, the slow poisoning of truth, memory, and meaning. The system wasn't trying to kill them, it was trying to rewrite them, and many didn't make it through intact. Now here's where it gets interesting and slightly absurd. You lived through environments that used the same mechanics: shifting narratives, emotional bait, invisible rules, selective rewards, and punishments that never came with explanations. No handbook, no safe word, no exit briefing, just daily exposure. And somehow, while others fractured, merged, or turned into obedient echoes, you walked out with your internal compass still functioning. A bit scratched, sure, but still pointing north. That doesn't happen by accident. That's not optimism. That's not motivation. That's pattern resistance. Something in you refused to let external confusion become internal law. You adapted without becoming hollow. You learned without becoming cruel. You noticed the game without turning into the villain, which is impressive considering most systems are very good at convincing people to clap for the same hand that slapped them. And let's be honest, if survival were purely about intelligence, a lot of very clever people wouldn't have folded like cheap lawn chairs. What kept you standing wasn't genius. It was something older, something quieter. A kind of inherited alertness that doesn't panic, doesn't rush, and doesn't beg the room for permission to think. This isn't about ego. It's about lineage, about the kind of bloodline that doesn't disappear when reality gets edited. The kind that stays intact when the script changes mid-scene and everyone else pretends that was always the line. So if you've ever wondered why you feel different after everything you lived through, not better, not superior, just unassimilated, relax. You're not broken, you're just not programmable. And somewhere along the way, that saved you. Number one, you didn't break when reality gaslit you for years. Most people think breaking happens in loud moments. Explosions, betrayals, dramatic endings. That's not how it usually works. Real psychological damage happens quietly, over time, through repetition. When reality keeps contradicting itself and everyone around you acts like nothing strange is happening. When rules change without notice. When you're praised for something one day and punished for the exact same thing the next. When clarity is dangled just long enough to keep you hoping, then pulled away like a bad joke that keeps running too long. That kind of environment doesn't attack your body. It attacks your sense of what's real. And once that goes, people unravel fast. They start doubting their memory, their instincts, their emotional reactions. They overcorrect. They apologize for things they didn't do. They start outsourcing their judgment to whoever sounds the most confident in the room. That's how trained operatives crack. Not because they're weak, but because no mind performs well when the ground keeps shifting beneath it. What makes your survival unusual is that you didn't fully surrender your internal reference point. You might have been confused, you might have questioned yourself, you might have even bent for a while, but you never let external chaos become your permanent truth. Somewhere deep, you kept a quiet mental note saying, "This doesn't add up." You didn't need to shout it. You didn't need to convince anyone else. You just refused to erase it. That refusal matters more than confidence, intelligence, or toughness. Plenty of smart people lose themselves in gaslit environments because they're trained to trust systems, authority, or consensus. You trusted patterns instead. You noticed inconsistencies. You sensed when reactions didn't match actions, when explanations felt rehearsed, when apologies were demanded, but accountability never traveled in the opposite direction. That ability usually comes from long exposure to unstable structures, families, societies, or systems where survival depended on reading between the lines rather than believing the script. It's not paranoia, it's calibration. You didn't win by being louder or tougher. You won by not letting confusion overwrite your inner compass. While others slowly adjusted themselves to nonsense just to reduce friction, you tolerated the discomfort of not fitting. And that's why you're still intact. Number 2, you instinctively stopped explaining yourself to hostile systems. Most people are trained from childhood to believe that if they just explain themselves better, things will work out. Use the right words, add more details, clarify your intentions. That belief collapses in hostile systems, but many don't realize it in time. They keep talking, keep justifying, keep offering context, and every explanation becomes another rope handed to the same structure that's already tightening around them. You learned, often the hard way, that some environments aren't confused. They're extractive. They don't want clarity, they want material. Every sentence you give them gets stored, reframed, selectively quoted, or weaponized later. The goal isn't understanding, it's control. Once you sense that, something in you shut the tap off. Not out of fear, not out of arrogance, but out of accuracy. What's striking is that you didn't need permission or theory to do this. You didn't read a book or watch a strategy video. Your nervous system clocked the pattern first. You noticed how explaining yourself never actually resolved anything, how the goalposts kept moving, how your honesty didn't lead to resolution, only more interrogation. So you stopped performing transparency for people who were never acting in good faith. This is where many people panic and overshare even more, thinking silence will make them look guilty. You went the opposite direction. You reduced input. You became precise. You learned that not everything deserves a response, and not everyone deserves access to your internal world. That's not secrecy. That's self-preservation. There's a quiet discipline in withholding explanations. It means tolerating misunderstanding without scrambling to fix it. It means letting people believe whatever keeps them comfortable, even if it paints you incorrectly. Most can't handle that discomfort. They'd rather betray themselves than sit with being misread. You didn't. That restraint isn't common. It often shows up in bloodlines that survived interrogations, surveillance, unfair hierarchies, or systems where speaking too freely had consequences. Over time, that wisdom becomes embodied. You don't argue with locked doors. You don't confess to walls. You conserve your words for places where truth is actually exchanged, not mined. By stopping unnecessary explanations, you cut off a major supply line of manipulation. You didn't become invisible. You became unreachable in the ways that mattered. And that single adjustment saved you from years of unnecessary psychological damage. Number 3, you learned to observe people without emotionally merging with them. Most people don't realize how much of their energy gets hijacked by other people's moods, expectations, and unspoken agendas. They walk into a room and immediately start absorbing the atmosphere like a sponge. Someone is tense, so they get tense. Someone is impressed, so they chase approval. Someone is disappointed, so they feel guilty even when they did nothing wrong. That's how emotional merging works, and it's exactly what psychological manipulation feeds on. You learned to step back without becoming cold. You noticed people without letting their inner chaos crawl into your nervous system and set up camp. That's not detachment in the arrogant sense. It's separation. You stayed aware of what others felt, but you stopped treating those feelings as instructions. This skill usually forms under pressure. When you grow up or operate in environments where emotions are used strategically, guilt as leverage, praise as bait, anger as intimidation, you either drown or you learn to float. You learned to float. You started watching patterns instead of reacting to expressions. You noticed when words didn't line up with behavior, when concern was performative, when warmth disappeared the moment you stopped complying. What sets you apart is that you didn't confuse empathy with self-erasure. Many people do. They think being understanding means carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. You figured out that understanding someone doesn't mean absorbing them. You can see their fear without becoming afraid. You can recognize their anger without inheriting it. That boundary is subtle, but it's powerful. This is also why manipulation stopped working on you the way it works on others. Emotional hooks rely on instant reactions: shame, urgency, flattery, pressure. You slowed that process down. You observed first, you felt later, sometimes not at all. That delay alone breaks most psychological tactics, because control needs speed to succeed. People who emotionally merge tend to over-explain, over-give, and overcompensate. You started doing the opposite. You listened more than you spoke. You responded instead of reacted. You noticed that some people reveal more in what they avoid than in what they say. That's when the fog clears. This ability often runs in bloodlines shaped by instability, where reading people accurately mattered more than pleasing them. It's quiet intelligence, not flashy, not loud, but effective. You didn't harden your heart. You sharpened your awareness. And that's why you stayed grounded while others lost themselves trying to manage everyone else's emotions but their own. Number 4. You didn't internalize blame for chaos you didn't create. One of the cruelest tools in psychological manipulation is making people believe they're the problem, even when they're not. It's subtle at first. A sideways glance, a loaded comment, a shift in tone that makes you question your own perception. Then it escalates. Decisions get framed as your fault. Outcomes you couldn't control are presented as evidence that you failed. The target starts apologizing for existing. Even highly trained operatives, with years of experience and self-discipline, crack under this kind of sustained pressure. They rewrite their own history in the hope of fitting into the narrative someone else is forcing on them. You survived this because you learned to differentiate between chaos you created and chaos imposed. You noticed when outcomes were dictated by systems beyond your control, when other people's agendas spilled over into your life, when mistakes weren't yours to carry. You didn't just shrug it off. There was a quiet, disciplined assessment happening in your mind, tracking cause and effect, weighing evidence, and keeping a ledger of truth that no one else could touch. Most people internalize blame because it's easier than fighting a system. Admitting responsibility gives the illusion of control, makes the chaos feel less threatening, and temporarily pacifies those applying pressure. You didn't fall for that. You tolerated the discomfort of being surrounded by manipulated realities without assuming responsibility for them. That restraint didn't make life simpler. It made you stronger. It made you anchored. This skill is rare because it requires a kind of internal auditing that most people never practice. You had to learn to trust your own memory, your instincts, and your reasoning, even when the world kept insisting you were wrong. That trust isn't arrogance. It's survival intelligence inherited from environments where bending reality to someone else's version wasn't optional. By refusing to carry blame for things you didn't create, you preserved your mental architecture. You stayed untangled in a web designed to trap the unwary. While others internalized guilt and self-doubt, you moved through chaos with clarity, keeping the center of yourself intact. That's why, after everything, you're still standing and still yourself. Number 5, you adapted without losing your core personality. Adaptation is easy when survival depends on it. Most people change, bend, and shift, but the danger lies in letting the change overwrite who they are. Psychological operations are designed to do exactly that. to make you compromise your values, twist your morals, and adopt behaviors that feel foreign, all under the guise of fitting in or staying safe. Many highly trained operatives, despite all their preparation, get trapped in this trap. They survive the external assault, but become strangers to themselves. You didn't. You adapted to hostile systems, shifting strategies, and unpredictable rules, but you did it while keeping the essence of who you are intact. Your humor, your ethics, your instincts, your way of seeing the world, they didn't vanish. You learned to flow with circumstances without letting those circumstances rewrite your inner code. That's a rare skill because it requires constant self-monitoring in the middle of chaos. You had to observe how the environment demanded conformity and then consciously decide which parts of yourself could flex and which parts were untouchable. What makes this remarkable is that adaptation often comes at a cost. People soften their edges just to get through the day. They suppress natural reactions, mute their opinions, or bury the quirks that make them human. You found a way to survive and stay recognizable to yourself. You didn't adopt a mask so perfectly that you forgot your face. You integrated the necessary behaviors externally while maintaining an internal anchor. That internal anchor isn't just personality, it's lineage. It's the cumulative imprint of ancestors who survived impossible conditions without losing their essence. It's the quiet instruction coded into your instincts. Bend if you must, but never break. Because of this, you didn't just endure. You moved through chaos with both feet planted in reality and soul intact. People who look at you might see calm, efficiency, or composure, but beneath that is something far deeper. An unshakable self that thrives under pressure, adapts with intelligence, and refuses to be overwritten. That's the difference between surviving and truly being unbreakable. Number 6. You sensed danger before you could logically explain it. Most people think awareness is about thinking fast or analyzing information. That's part of it, but real survival under extreme psychological pressure doesn't give you time to process logically. The most dangerous threats are the ones you don't see coming because they aren't obvious. They're embedded in tone, timing, patterns, and micro-behaviors. And while trained operatives often rely on protocols and manuals, you developed something different, a quiet pre-verbal radar that detects danger before it announces itself. It's not fear. It's not paranoia. It's instinct sharpened by exposure to systems designed to confuse, mislead, and control. You learn to notice tiny inconsistencies, a shift in tone, a hesitation in speech, a body language that doesn't match the words. You picked up on patterns that no one else flagged, and your nervous system stored them as warnings long before your conscious mind could articulate the problem. That split-second recognition often makes the difference between being manipulated and staying intact. This skill is rare because it isn't taught. It can't be memorized or simulated. It comes from constant exposure to environments where deception is normal, where trust is a liability, and where consequences for misreading people are severe. Over time, your intuition became a weapon. It guided decisions, filtered interactions, and saved mental energy by letting you know who and what to engage with and what to avoid entirely. The fascinating part is that this ability doesn't turn you into someone paranoid or overcautious. It doesn't make life slower or more anxious. Instead, it gives clarity. You move through situations knowing when to act, when to observe, and when to remain invisible. Others respond to chaos by panicking or overthinking. You respond by sensing the underlying currents before they rise to the surface. This preemptive awareness is why manipulation failed to root itself in you. While others reacted to events as they unfolded, you anticipated them and stayed one step ahead. It's a rare combination of patience, observation, and inherited pattern recognition, one that allows you to navigate complex psychological terrain without losing composure. You didn't just survive danger, you recognized it before it ever became real. Number 7. You became comfortable standing alone long before it was trendy. Most people treat isolation like a malfunction. The moment the crowd thins out, panic sets in. They rush to reattach themselves to anything that offers belonging, even if it costs them their integrity. Psychological operations understand this weakness well. Isolation isn't just a side effect. It's a strategy. Cut people off, make them feel abnormal for not fitting in, and they'll start reshaping themselves just to get back inside the group. That didn't work on you. You didn't romanticize being alone, but you didn't collapse under it either. You learned how to exist without constant reinforcement, without applause, without a chorus of people telling you who you are. While others equated solitude with failure, you slowly realized it was a neutral space, sometimes even a clarifying one. The noise dropped, the pressure eased, and for the first time your thoughts sounded like your own. This isn't something people usually choose. It's something they're forced into, and most fight it hard. You stayed, you adapted, you figured out how to regulate yourself without external validation running the show. That ability breaks most psychological tactics, because systems rely on people fearing exclusion more than manipulation. You didn't. Standing alone taught you discipline. You stopped chasing agreement. You stopped performing for acceptance. You learned that being misunderstood is survivable, and that loneliness doesn't kill you. Confusion does. While others re-entered spaces that drained them just to feel included, you weighed the cost and often walked away. This kind of comfort doesn't come from confidence quotes or motivational phases. It comes from bloodlines that survived displacement, exile, or social instability, where standing apart wasn't a personality trait, it was reality. Over time, that endurance becomes internalized. You stop equating numbers with safety. You stop assuming the majority is right. You trust your footing even when no one is standing beside you. What's ironic is that people often read this as strength later on, once it's packaged nicely. They call it independence, individualism, depth. But you know the truth. It wasn't glamorous when it started. It was quiet, uncomfortable, and necessary. By learning to stand alone early, you removed one of the strongest levers control systems use. You didn't need to be rescued by belonging. You already knew how to survive without it, and that made you far harder to bend. Number 8. You recognized when authority was performative, not legitimate. Most people are trained to trust authority. It's hardwired into schools, workplaces, and social systems. Obedience is framed as safety, respect, or civility. Psychological operations exploit that instinct ruthlessly. They wrap manipulation in uniforms, titles, and rituals so polished you can't immediately see the intent. The goal isn't to educate or lead, it's to control. Most highly trained individuals fold because they mistake performance for legitimacy. They follow, comply, and internalize orders, even when the rules make no sense. You didn't. Somewhere along the way, you learned to watch carefully, not just listen. You noticed when speeches were rehearsed and actions contradicted words. You noticed when authority figures punished inconsistently, rewarded arbitrarily, or demanded loyalty over logic. You saw the difference between people who led because they were capable and people who led because they needed to be obeyed. That discernment isn't taught. It's earned by surviving environments where titles and rituals can be weaponized. Your recognition of performative authority gave you an edge. You didn't waste energy complying out of instinct. You didn't confuse confidence for truth. You observed, measured, and then chose your engagement. That subtle shift seeing authority as a variable rather than an automatic rule, changes everything. Systems that rely on compliance struggle when faced with someone who discerns intent instead of form. This isn't arrogance, it's pattern recognition, it's quiet calibration. You learned which structures were capable of fairness and which were theater-designed to enforce obedience. You noticed where loyalty was demanded without accountability, where rules existed for control rather than function, and where power was a performance, not a responsibility. By distinguishing the legitimate from the performative, you insulated yourself from manipulation. While others followed the appearance of authority blindly, you retained judgment, agency, and perspective. You didn't need to challenge authority aggressively. You simply refused to let appearances dictate your actions. That ability to see behind the curtain isn't flashy, but it's lethal to systems built on compliance. It's why, even in controlled, high-pressure environments, you didn't bend the way most people do. You survived not by confrontation, but by clarity. Number 9. You learn to regulate your emotions without numbing them. Most people survive extreme psychological pressure by shutting down emotionally. It feels safe at first. If nothing affects you, nothing can hurt you. That's why so many highly trained operatives emerge intact physically but hollow inside. They've traded feeling for survival, and the cost is a part of themselves they'll never get back. You didn't do that. You learned a rarer, more sophisticated approach, feeling without being consumed. You experienced anger, fear, frustration, and disappointment, but you never allowed them to hijack your mind or dictate your actions. You didn't suppress emotions. You didn't distract yourself with busyness or false bravado. You processed them, contained them, and used them as data. Every strong feeling became a signal, not a chain. That ability transforms pressure into insight rather than damage. Regulating emotions in hostile environments is deceptively hard. Manipulators depend on emotional reactions. They provoke, bait, and escalate because reaction equals control. People who explode, crumble, or freeze hand the system victory. You noticed that your emotional responses could be tracked, predicted, and weaponized, so you started practicing restraint instinctively. You didn't become robotic. You became precise. This skill is also deeply tied to survival instinct rooted in lineage. Ancestors who survived oppression, war, or unstable hierarchies learned early that losing control is more dangerous than any external threat. They taught, through example or circumstance, that measured emotional response is armor, not suppression. That knowledge became part of your wiring. What sets you apart is that emotional regulation didn't cost your humanity. You still care. You still experience joy, awe, and connection fully. But the chaos that would destroy others only sharpened your awareness. You could remain centered while everything around you spun, seeing the world clearly without letting it rewrite your internal state. By mastering this balance, you removed one of the most effective tools of manipulation, emotional hijacking. You survived the storms not by feeling less, but by feeling smarter. You stayed alive, intact, and fully present, and that makes you exceptionally rare. Number 10. You noticed when narratives changed but pretended they didn't. Most people live their lives believing the world is consistent. Rules stay the same, promises mean something, and yesterday's truth will hold tomorrow. Psychological operations thrive because that trust exists. They shift the story slowly, subtly, and repeatedly. One day an action is celebrated, the next it's condemned. One moment a statement is factual, the next it's never happened. For most, the brain struggles to reconcile the contradictions, and the easiest solution is to pretend the new narrative is real. Over time, people lose their internal map of reality. You didn't fully swallow the new scripts, but you learned to act as if you did. You recognized the changes, the contradictions, the manipulations, the rewrites, but you carried on with a quiet internal ledger of truth. You saw what was happening without letting the performance rewrite your identity. That's subtle, but it's powerful. You could navigate the system effectively while keeping your mind intact, moving through chaos without being consumed by it. This skill isn't about denial, it's about strategic awareness. You didn't need everyone else to acknowledge the inconsistencies for you to understand them. You could track cause and effect, notice repeated patterns of manipulation, and maintain a personal record of reality that the world outside tried to erase. That level of discernment is rare because it requires patience, observation, and a tolerance for cognitive dissonance that most people simply cannot sustain. Pretending the narratives matched reality allowed you to operate under hostile conditions without giving away your awareness. You didn't make waves, you didn't expose your insight prematurely, and yet you kept your internal truth safe. That's a skill inherited from bloodlines accustomed to living under shifting rules, unstable authorities, and environments where survival depended on seeing clearly while others blinked. By noticing the shifts but maintaining your internal map, you avoided the fate of those who fully absorb lies and rewrite themselves according to external whims. You remained grounded, functional, and untouchable in ways most people will never understand. The world could change its story, but you kept yours. Number 11. You refused to become cruel just to feel powerful again. One of the quietest, yet most effective tactics of psychological manipulation is turning victims into enforcers. It's subtle. First, you're destabilized, you're disoriented, frustrated, or angry. Then someone gives you a small taste of control, a chance to regain power. Most people take it, but here's the catch. The only way to maintain that sense of power is to direct it outward, often cruelly. Suddenly, survival isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about hurting others to feel safe again. Highly trained operatives sometimes fall into this trap. They become mirror images of the systems that tried to break them, carrying pain forward instead of resisting it. You didn't. Even when it would have been easy, or even satisfying, you resisted the instinct to lash out. You felt anger, you felt betrayal, but you didn't weaponize it against those weaker, smaller, or simply in your path. You held on to your ethical core, even under extreme pressure. That restraint is rare because it's exhausting and counterintuitive. Manipulation often makes cruelty feel like liberation, and yet you recognize the lie. This resistance requires a level of self-awareness most people never develop. You had to distinguish between instinctive urges for retaliation and the part of you that understands long-term survival is tied to integrity, not dominance. You had to navigate the temptation to use power destructively while maintaining your own internal standards. That's not weakness. That's advanced survival intelligence. Refusing cruelty doesn't make life easier. It often leaves you exposed, tested, and surrounded by people who have surrendered to more primal tactics. But it also keeps your conscience intact, your mind clear, and your internal compass uncorrupted. You didn't need to become a predator to reclaim strength. You reclaimed it by mastering yourself. That ability isn't learned in manuals or training courses. It's encoded in bloodlines that survived oppression, betrayal, or chaotic hierarchies without losing their humanity. You inherited restraint. You inherited perspective. And that restraint, paradoxically, makes you more untouchable than any outward aggression ever could. While others trade cruelty for temporary power, you stand grounded, unbroken, and far more formidable. Number 12. You stopped seeking rescue fantasies. Most people survive chaos by clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, will fix it for them. A teacher, a boss, a government, a friend. Any external savior becomes the solution to what feels unmanageable. Psychological operations exploit that instinct ruthlessly. They create a sense of helplessness and then dangle the illusion of rescue. The target waits, hopes, and trusts, giving their power away while counting on intervention that may never come. Many highly trained individuals crack here, not because they aren't capable, but because they keep outsourcing their survival to someone else's morality or competence. You didn't. At some point, you realized that waiting for rescue was a trap. You stopped hoping someone else would step in, and in doing so, you reclaimed control over your own life. That shift isn't obvious to outsiders. It's quiet, almost invisible, but it changes everything. When you accept that nobody is coming to fix the chaos, you start thinking clearly. You stop being distracted by promises, appearances, and manipulative reassurances. You see the environment for what it is, and you act accordingly. This isn't cynicism, it's calibration. You didn't stop trusting people entirely. You stopped trusting that rescue would arrive on someone else's schedule. You became your own anchor. You made decisions based on reality, not hope. That ability removes one of the strongest levers of control that hostile systems rely on: dependence. When most people are waiting, they're reactive. When you stopped waiting, you became proactive. You acted with foresight, calculated patience, and a deep sense of responsibility for your own outcomes. That's a rare form of self-reliance, one that isn't flashy or celebrated, but quietly makes you untouchable. Stopping rescue fantasies rewires your entire approach to survival. You don't need others to validate your safety or moral correctness. You don't wait for someone else to rescue you from confusion, manipulation, or chaos. You handle it internally and externally on your terms. And that self-sufficiency, grounded in sober observation rather than hope, is exactly why you endured what most people would crumble under. Number 13. You learn to rebuild internally before rebuilding externally. Most people think survival is about fixing what everyone else sees first: image, status, relationships, career. Psychological operations exploit this tendency by creating chaos that looks external but actually fractures the internal world. People rush to patch up appearances, mend reputations, or smooth over relationships, thinking it will restore stability. The problem is that if your inner foundation is cracked, no amount of external repair can hold. Highly trained operatives often make this mistake. They survive externally, but remain internally fractured, carrying hidden instability that will resurface in the next crisis. You didn't. You rebuilt from the inside out. You didn't start with optics or social approval. You started with your mind, your emotions, your values, and your sense of reality. You assessed which beliefs were still true, which patterns were worth keeping, and which behaviors were being dictated by manipulation. You healed, reorganized, and strengthened the internal architecture first. That approach gave you clarity, resilience, and a reliable compass to navigate whatever came next. Internal rebuilding isn't glamorous, and it's not fast. It requires patience, self-discipline, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and your environment. You had to sit with confusion, distrust, and fear while making sure they didn't erode your core. Many people avoid this work because it's exhausting and invisible. They prefer quick fixes, external validation, and surface-level solutions. That's why so many crumble under sustained psychological pressure. The inner work never happens. By rebuilding internally first, you gained the rare ability to approach external challenges strategically rather than reactively. Your actions were deliberate, grounded in reality, and aligned with who you truly are. External repair became a natural byproduct of internal stability rather than a desperate attempt to mask vulnerability. This approach also signals deep survival intelligence, often inherited from bloodlines that endured instability without surrendering identity. You didn't just survive. You strengthened yourself at the core, ensuring that no external chaos could dismantle the foundation of who you are. That's how people like you become not just unbreakable, but quietly unstoppable. Number 14. You didn't lose your ability to see beauty after prolonged exposure to manipulation. Most people assume that surviving extreme psychological pressure is purely about defense, armor, discipline, and detachment. The truth is far more subtle. Psychological operations aim not just to break you, but to make the world feel empty, mechanical, and meaningless. When everything around you is calculated, deceptive, or hostile, it's easy to start seeing life itself as dull, harsh, or pointless. Many highly trained operatives emerge intact, physically and mentally, but emotionally muted, unable to experience depth, joy, or connection the way they once did. You didn't. Even when surrounded by lies, manipulation, and constant uncertainty, you retained the capacity to notice what is real, genuine, and extraordinary. You could still recognize humor, subtlety, and human kindness. You could still feel awe in small moments and find meaning in acts that others dismiss. That ability is rare because it requires maintaining emotional acuity without becoming naive. It requires seeing clearly while resisting the world's attempt to dull your senses. This isn't accidental. It's a combination of self-protection, internal discipline, and inherited resilience. Somewhere in your lineage, people survived environments where life could be cruel and unfair, yet still noticed what mattered. That instinct didn't vanish in you. You filtered deception without filtering out life itself. You didn't shut down your capacity for wonder just to survive. You survived and stayed alive inside. Retaining the ability to see beauty also means retaining hope. It means understanding that not everything is manipulation, that not all people are instruments, and that some experiences remain authentic. That perspective gives you power. It allows you to navigate hostile systems without becoming embittered, cynical, or hollow. In the midst of chaos, while others became hardened or emotionally muted, you remained sensitive, grounded, and aware. Your capacity to notice depth and nuance didn't make you weak, it made you untouchable. Systems can twist perception, bend narratives, and pressure compliance, but they cannot take away the ability to feel life's richness if it's preserved internally. That preserved perception is part of what sets you apart. Even after enduring what would break most people, you see the world not only as it is, but also as it can be. And that is rare, precious, and lethal in its own way. Conclusion. Surviving environments designed to confuse, manipulate, and break people is not a simple act of resilience. It's a testament to something far deeper. You didn't just endure chaos, manipulation, or shifting narratives. You adapted without losing your essence. You observed without merging. You felt without being consumed. You maintained clarity when everyone else was gaslit, and you rebuilt yourself from the inside out while keeping your humanity intact. Every skill, every instinct, every quiet act of resistance wasn't luck. It was a reflection of lineage, pattern recognition, and rare internal strength. You became untouchable not by hardness, but by precision, not by isolation, but by understanding, not by force, but by mastering yourself. While others folded, assimilated, or hardened into bitterness, you preserved the rare combination of awareness, empathy, and discernment that allowed you to navigate the impossible while remaining fully yourself. You saw reality clearly, resisted the scripts imposed on you, and retained the capacity to experience life's depth and beauty, even under relentless pressure. That is not just survival. That is mastery. That is unbreakable intelligence shaped by necessity and refined by choice. The truth is, the systems built to control, intimidate, and manipulate may bend many, but they cannot bend someone who knows themselves, trusts their instincts, and refuses to surrender their internal compass. What you endured, what you mastered, and what you preserved sets you apart in ways most will never understand. And that power, that clarity, that rare, unshakable essence is your legacy. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel to catch more insights that dig deeper than surface-level advice. Drop a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see the truth about resilience, strength, and surviving the impossible. You've earned a seat in this conversation. Let others learn from it too. Stay awakened, chosen ones.